Are we?
Yes.
Where are we?
Here.
Why are we here? Not entirely clear. We are misfits thrust into existence by random chance, with no hints at all as to how we're supposed to make sense of it all. It's immensely bizarre. Here we are.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Here We Are podcast. I'm very excited for this show today. You guys may not know this about me, but one of the reasons why I have this podcast, I had an interest in science for much of my adult life, but I had a period of time when I started just obsessively watching the Animal Planet and watching tons of documentaries and David Attenborough and that sort of stuff. And it just got me thinking so much about life and exploring science even more than I already was, and obsessing over all of these different ideas. And so it's pretty cool that I'm actually getting to talk to someone that was on an Animal Planet show, co-host of the show Little Giants, which I just started watching, and I recommend you guys check it out as well. And maybe one of the cooler titles, we've had a lot of people on this show. You're Billy, you're 300 some. We're nearing 400 episodes here, and you're the first Astrobiofuturist on the show. Billy Almon is joining me today. Billy, how you doing?
Good, Shane. What's going on?
Oh, not much, man. I'm very excited to talk to you because I'd love for you to tell people a little bit about your background anyway. You were recommended to me by I think a couple different past guests, and then I started following you on Instagram, got into your stuff. I love what you're doing, and I want to know what is Astrobiofuturist, and if that requires maybe setting up a little bit of how you got into it and your background first, that would be great.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that question. So, as an astrobiofuturist, I essentially look at how can we reimagine different portions or different elements of the human condition, of human experiences. How can we reimagine them for people who will ultimately be traveling to the moon, to the Mars, eventually further out into the galaxy. And also, how can we use what we develop and create in order to do that for people amongst the stars? How can we use and leverage a lot of that technology, creativity, and thinking to reimagine a lot of human experiences here on good old planet Earth? And a lot of that work for me is rooted in my background as an experienced designer and storyteller, creating immersive experiences for companies that create places of magic and happiness, and also my background as a practitioner of biomimicry, which is this approach to innovation where you're studying organisms in nature in order to mimic and imitate their sustainable natural strategies of problem solving. So it's combining those two things to not only look at how can we reimagine certain experiences for people in space, but also how can we improve just the human condition here on Earth?
Oh, man, what do I want to talk about first? I started looking at your work, and I was kind of shocked and disappointed with myself that we've never had an episode talking about biomimicry before. Man. It's just one of the coolest subjects. Much of this show, we talk quite a bit about like evolutionary biology and psychology, a lot of human mind stuff, but also how it relates to and what we can learn from, evolutionary processes and wildlife, and do a fair amount of, not enough episodes about wildlife, but a fair amount. And I was like, how in the world have I missed biomimicry? What a blind spot. So could you tell people a little bit about what what biomimicry is. And by the way, am I at least able to say, when you're talking about designing experiences and stuff, you're talking about things like amusement parks and stuff like that, sometimes integrating some of your work into improving entertainment experiences like that by using things from within nature.
Yes,
right?
exactly. Okay, so first of all, I am so honored to be the disciple that brings forth the good news of biomimicry to you and your audience. So thank you. Thank you for that.
It's so important. It's so important.
And yeah, so when I'm referring to my background as an experienced designer, it is spent over a decade working for a certain company that has theme parks and cruise ships and hotels and resorts in places
Very
like
cool.
California and Florida. So I use that experience of how do you craft a place, a moment in time that will imprint memories on you and your family, and leave you feeling better than you came in. So I use that lens of storytelling and creativity in the work that I do as an astrobiofuturist. As it pertains to biomimicry is this great, amazing process and approach to problem solving where and it's something that has been done and practiced by humans since time immemorial, really, where we are looking at nature, we're studying how different organisms go about solving problems for life at their scale, and then we essentially isolate or identify the strategy that they're using, and we replicate it to address problems at the human scale. So one of the examples that I always use when referring to biomimicry is the example of Velcro. The Swiss inventor who came up with the idea for Velcro, he would always take his dogs for walks through the forest, and he would come home and he'd realize that there's these little spherical burr seeds that were always caught in his dog's fur every time that they came back from these forest walks. I
grew up all around them.
Okay, so perfect. So you might already know the story. So one day he took one of those burr seeds under a microscope, and he noticed that there were all of these little curly Q little hooks that were coming off of the main seed of the sphere. And he realized this is actually a really cool and dope way to attach things to each other. And that was the biological function of that little curly Q little hook. It was to attach to animals that would be traveling through the forest so that the seeds would latch onto the fur and then be carried off to other places where they could essentially propagate and grow into other plants and trees and so forth. So he came back with he took that idea, and from that he created what we all use as Velcro, this method of attaching things to each other in a simple way.
Yeah.
So that's an example of what biomimicry is, and it can be applied and has been applied to so many different ways. And there's a lot of really cool examples of how biomimicry has already impacted or informed space exploration, and how a lot of people are turning to nature for thinking of how we will explore other planets.
It just makes me upset that we don't wear Velcro as adults, as I think about it. And by the way, you can tell that the burrs came from that, because if you live around, I remember as a child, they would always attach right to the Velcro, and which would kind of render the Velcro useless, ironically enough, if you get enough of those sand burrs on there. But what are we doing with laces, Billy? I'm an adult. Look what I can do. I can tie knots. It's like a tie. It's like, oh, cool. You can do a double winch, but why would you? Why are we putting this thing around? It's so overrated.
Completely
we got to bring
overrated.
Velcro back.
Most of my shoes at this point, even as an adult, I don't think I have a lot of shoes with laces. Actually, I prefer like straps and Velcro. It's just easier. Like, how much time I got to bend over? Now my back is all hurting and I'm sore back because I had to tie my shoe. That doesn't seem right.
My shoes are always untied too, and then people make fun of me for them being I gotta stop playing whatever sport to tie my shoes, and people are like, double knotted, and it's a whole
nothing
mess.
about the pursuit of happiness aligns with tying your shoes. It's just not part of the Constitution.
Can I'll share my early experience with learning about biomimicry, and because I'd really like to dig in. I mean, I always love to take the conversation in whatever direction my guests like, but I hope we can talk a bunch about biomimicry, and I want to make sure and touch on your show as well.
Let's do it.
More than touch on your show, plug the heck out of your show. But
I love that too.
Are you familiar with Ray Anderson?
I am familiar with Ray Anderson. I have, yes.
So I don't know how in the world I came across this, but this is like over a decade ago. I just happened to pick up this audiobook by this guy, Ray. I think maybe I saw a TED Talk by him or something like that. He's unfortunately passed away a few years ago or something, but he was this, I think I was living in Texas at the time, and I'm from Wisconsin. I was interested in communicating science in like rural areas and areas that were maybe not the most enthusiastic about hearing about science always. I was working a lot of comedy clubs at the time, and it was kind of sometimes hard to convey some of the ideas. And I thought, like, here's this guy with this Southern twang and is very like likable and everything. And he is this carpet manufacturer that just in the last couple decades of his life just started seeing the writing on the wall with climate change and thought, how do I make a business that's more sustainable? And he started looking into biomimicry. Like I said, I read this book like 12 or listened to this book like 12 years ago or something. But I remember hearing, taking things like looking at the jungle or forest floor and seeing that it's like, well, not everything's uniform on the floor here. Why are our carpets so uniform? And developing this kind of recyclable patchwork system of carpets. So, a hotel gets this beautiful patchwork of all these different colors and designs, and then when there's a big stain on some piece, you pull off this one particular piece, like pulling a leaf off of the ground or something like that, and replacing it with a similar sized portion, rather than having to redo everything every 5-10 years or whatever in these high traffic areas. And it was just a lot of ideas like that, and it just really captured my imagination. And I've always been into, like I said, watching Animal Planet type stuff. And like you said, this is what humans have been doing since kind of the dawn of time, whether we're aware of it or not, has been taking insights from nature and adapting them into technologies that we use.
Yeah, and what's cool is, I mean, he also set up there was set up, kind of in his honor, this award for, people who were looking to apply biomimicry to other types of businesses, called the Ray of Hope Prize. And it's like, I want to say it's like $100,000 prize to, startups, or people that are looking to use biomimicry to do like amazing things and address climate change. And with the example that you gave of the carpet, I mean, it was a huge game changer, because one of the things about that particular example was it was also a way that reduced a lot of the chemicals that are used in glue. They found a way, because of how, I think they were looking at how leaves fall on the forest and how detritus kind of forms, this forest floor. And so in the interlocking system that they created, I believe, it's been a while since I've looked at this example, but, the carpet themselves, the way that the carpet works is it also leverages friction as a way to keep down without using a lot of, toxic glues and a lot of chemicals as adhesives. So that in and of itself was a huge, huge thing.
Having like jigsaw pieces locking together instead, sort of. Yeah. Yeah. So, and I remember kind of I think the name of the book was Confessions of a Radical Industrialist or something that I read, but it was a pretty grandiose title, but it was impactful on me. And it was, because it will also, he ended up doubling his profit margins by doing all these things that most companies look at and like they're trying to regulate us and it's going to ruin the economy and this is this huge investment and this and that. And he was able to show that integrating these processes where it was a way to save money and to make things more efficient, to make things actually more profitable, which helped the planet, which helped the business owners, which kind of helped. It was just a win-win-win there for everyone involved.
Awesome.
And there has to be a lot of stuff like that out there, right? Like some of these innovations where we go like, well, we can't rely on fossil fuel or something like that. So I guess we have to make this accommodation and some compromise, and we'll have to put this extra effort into doing things. But some of the things that we're learning from nature are untapped efficiencies that actually make us more productive than we were without.
Oh yeah, that's one of the real appeals of biomimicry, right? For the people who aren't just like, we should be doing this because it's closer to how nature works, which means it's inherently more sustainable. Right. For the people who are just like, show me the numbers of why I should be doing this, which there's plenty of people who think that way. It's the fact that nature is inherently efficient. Nature is efficient by nature. Right? Like, yeah, we as humans,
3.5 billion years of research and development.
Exactly. Okay. See, you know what's up. So I was about to say, like, that's one of the taglines is, the natural world has been in this process of test and adjust for a very, 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 very long time. And we are just now tapping into that. So the things that nature has already figured out don't work. They do translate to, efficiencies and, economies of scale and all of these things. There's one other example that people might be familiar with is the Tokyo Maglev train that was designed to mimic the form of a kingfisher bird. There was an engineer who was also an ornithologist who was tasked with making this subway. His primary task was every time that this train would go through a tunnel, it would create a sonic boom, and the neighbors who lived in that area, they would always complain like, this train is driving us nuts, right? So he was tasked.
And the real estate agents would complain about that too. Like, don't mind, there's a few sonic booms throughout the day
the views
in
are great.
This neighborhood. Other
than that, sonic boom, man. But the views are killer. That's what you're really paying for. So he was tasked with coming up with a way to reduce, to get rid of the sonic boom. And he was a bird watcher. So one day he was watching these birds. He saw a kingfisher that swooped into the water, and because of the way that its skull and its beak works, it creates very minimal to non-existent splashing when it goes in the water to capture fish.
Wow!
And he redesigned this maglev train to kind of have that aerodynamic form that it has. And not only did it get rid of the sonic boom, but it increased the efficiency of fuel. It increased its power efficiency by 30%. So, there are forms in nature, there are patterns, there are textures, there are, all kinds of different mechanisms that are at play in nature to help all of these living things around us be as efficient as possible, right? Like, just to give a gross example, the reason why birds poop while they're flying is because it alleviates the weight that they carry while they're flying, which reduces the amount of energy that they have to expend to stay in the air. So,
it's part of the stress response system too in a lot of mammals when they're about to be chased by something. Release all that extra cargo and run like hell.
even our fight, flight, or freeze response has the same thing. Your bladder loosens up so you can get your little Usain Bolt on and piece out of a situation, right? Like that's part of it. So all of these inherent efficiencies are what we are beginning to tap into as more and more people begin to practice biomimicry.
I mean, I think this is one of the amazing things of and one of the big downsides of that people are unaware of some of the kind of climate denial or just science denial generally is that it might not be nice to think about problems, but knowing and recognizing problems can sometimes create opportunities. That train example is a perfect example of what if they would have never had to do this pain in the butt task of like, okay, you bunch of whiners, we'll get rid of this sonic boom scaring your dogs and children every 20 minutes or so. What if they wouldn't have ever had to address that? They would have never found something that's 30% more efficient, which makes the cost of getting on that train more reasonably priced. It makes the profit margins higher. It makes the amount of fuel and energy used to push that train less. It's just, again, it's easy to cherry pick these survivorship things and be like, why can't everything be like this? And there's reasons why we use that one great example like that as well. It's not always that easy, but identifying problems can come with a lot of opportunities, and we've seen that a lot with biomimicry. Could you talk a little bit about, I heard you mention, did you say economies of scale? Was that the term that I heard you use?
Yeah.
Could you define that?
So loose definition, not, economist definition, but just in terms of, essentially when you have something that is efficient, when you produce multiple numbers of that, the cost of producing it starts to go down, right? So the more that I have of this one machined, modular thing, if I produce more of it, the cost of each individual unit begins to decrease over time. So as I scale it up, the cost of it becomes more and more economic the more I produce. And so the example that it's not a one-to-one example, but the one thing that comes to mind when I think of that is, the shape of a honeycomb, right? The shape of a honeycomb, the hexagon, is I want to say it's the most efficient form that mathematicians have identified, right? And there's been a lot of speculation on how bees actually create this form. Is it is it a form that they actually create, or is it a form that eventually forms over time as wax starts to melt in place and things begin to solidify? Do bees start with circles that they make their hives out of, and then they essentially form into hexagonal patterns over time? But the hexagon is a shape that you see in a lot of designs, not only because it's efficient, but because of its flexibility and its ability to kind of be able to fit into any particular location. So there's this idea that there's these things that we refer to as deep patterns in nature, and one of those deep patterns is things being modular, and being able to be packaged and repackaged. Like a cell in a lot of ways is a modular system, right? It replicates, but it's still essentially the same. So another example is a lot of people are excited about the potential of additive manufacturing and 3D printing. That's something you can find in nature, right? Like there's paper wasps who essentially, actually there's a lot of different creatures who, additively create their dwellings and their homes. So I don't have a specific example of that translation into economies of scale, but the examples in nature are prevalent.
What do paper wasps do?
So paper wasp, they essentially I want to say that they ingest something, and then they, with their saliva, when they're building their shelters, I'll say, it's very much like, if you've ever seen a 3D printer, take the filament and then just like layer by layer produce something. Paper wasp and a lot of organisms create their I guess that's a hive the same way. They essentially do it like that, if that making sense at all.
Right.
The other example for me that I love around additive manufacturing in nature is actually spiders, right? Like spiders in their body, they actually have these 4 chambers that have 4 different kind of chemical combinations or components within them. And then they actually mix those 4 chambers together to create different types of webbing composites, depending on what the spider needs to use that web for. So some might be sticky, some might be thin and strong, but it's the same kind of process of taking these chambers and then mixing this chemical construction to create and produce something that will then be used to manufacture a web. So it's everywhere. Like, we're not doing anything new.
Why aren't we seeing that in the Spider-Man movies? That's a underutilized Spider-Man. He's always just swinging from a thing, or maybe a shoot a thing and it clogs up a gun. That's about all he's not building a home. He could be making his own suit. He has someone else make his suit. He could weave his own suit out of, if you're a real Spider-Man, I feel like you make your own suit out of your bodily thing. I mean, that's he's really not utilizing. Spider-Man could take a look at spiders and maybe learn a few things.
I'll cut him a little bit of slack on that, because I feel like, the one thing with web is at some point, it begins to break down. So the last thing you want is to be in your spider web suit, like swinging through the air, and that's the only thing you have on, and then it just starts to decompose as you're trying to attach to the Empire State Building, right? As you're swinging through New York, right?
Yeah.
So I'll cut him some slack there. But
they're going to see more than your face.
Oh yeah.
Your secret identity.
That's the other part, right?
Yeah, let's not cut Spider-Man too much slack, but sure. I mean, I'll give it to him.
I'll meet you halfway on that one. Yeah.
Sure. So what about, because I think this will start from, talking about global things and integrate in with Astrobiofuturism and integrating things into space. But could you talk a little bit about, I'd like to talk about circular economies a little bit, because it's another thing we haven't talked about on the show that's related, that evolution, at least in the scale, at least over this long period of time, has been able to make use of every damn thing. There's not a lot of waste. What's waste for one thing? The classic example of waste is going to the bathroom. Well, if you're a dung beetle or all sorts of insects or whatever, you're going to make use of that. That becomes fertilizer. That turns into a tree. We had an episode recently called the Body Farm episode in the University of Kentucky, where they show what happens to a decomposing body and what happens to the ecosystem and how much the ecosystem uses. So you think about, that life is gone, what a waste, and that doesn't, it no longer exists. It does. It actually creates all this new life all around in this ecosystem. And then, modern humans come around and we have, starts with the Industrial Revolution, and then, or the Agricultural Revolution, and then moves into Industrial Revolution, and it makes a lot of sense. A lot of species, no species out there is sitting like, well, I better pick up after myself or whatever. It's just that other things make use of their waste over time, and there's this symbiotic relationship, and this happens over long periods of time, and thousands of years, millions of years. And it's just that the waste that humans are making is happening really quickly, and it's a dramatic change. So could we talk a little bit about like maybe that and a little bit of what could be learned from nature and how nature manages waste?
Yeah, it's funny when you brought that up. Okay, so as of this recording, the Milwaukee Bucks just won the world championship, the National Basketball Association World Championship, right?
Yeah.
And that means that right now there are shipping containers full of t-shirts that say Phoenix Suns world champions. Right?
The Phoenix
that
Suns
are being shipped
world champions
from the United States to, some island country right now and being dumped, right? Like we export our trash here in the United States, right? So
meanwhile, they're living in this bizarro reality where they think the Phoenix Suns are the best basketball team out there.
Right. And so, my mind, that's exactly where, when you talk about circular economy and you talk about waste, that's the first thing that goes to my mind is like that fresh shipment of shirts, that someone is sending, because we export our trash to other nations. And so for me, I think personally, I think that we need a Manhattan Project equivalent initiative for trash. Because it's just, I just saw a report the other day that showed that microplastics are showing up on the backs of bees. If you've ever seen a bee flying around and you've got to see like a macro shot and you see like all the pollen attached to a bee, right? Imagine that being pieces of, straws or forks or, what have you that's attached to these bees, right? We've got whales and all kinds of, ocean marine life that's showing up with stomachs full of trash in the ocean. They've discovered that at the very bottom of the ocean, at the deepest depths that we can go, they're finding trash. At the bottom of the ocean, there have been more people that have explored space than have ever been to the deepest parts of the ocean. And yet our trash is there, right? So when you talk about the circular economy, for me, the biggest thing is, we need more. Not only do we need more, but we also need an accelerant for the companies that already exist that serve the role of decomposer in an ecosystem. So you brought up, dung beetles, worms, all these things that take what exists and breaks it down and translate it. The thing that is often underappreciated about decomposers in an ecosystem is that they're also producers. They don't just break stuff down, they turn it into nutrients for other organisms to capitalize on. And so we need, in my opinion, more companies that are focused on purely digesting the waste that's produced and converting it into something else. And, I think when you have more companies that are doing that, I think there's also a life cycle that in order for us to get rid of all this trash, my personal, theory is that we need companies that only live for a certain amount of time to accomplish the goal of decomposing something. And then that company goes away, because I think that the livelihood, the way that companies are structured now to live forever at all costs, I think it's inherently problematic to the system of circularity that we're trying to create.
The decomposing company decomposes itself in the end. It's self-destructing decomposing company. Yeah, this is yeah.
I was just gonna say I think that's what we need.
I think that this is, I was just a few weeks ago visiting an old high school buddy here in my hometown, and he was talking about he's a fisherman, and he was talking about how you can't eat fish that are of a certain size, because it means that they've been around long enough that they have X amount of mercury. The longer a fish has been alive, the more mercury it has in it. And that is such a bizarre world that we now live in. Imagine our ancestors, even a few hundred years ago, being like, "Oh, don't eat that fish. That one's too big."
Yeah.
It's incredible the predicament that we find ourselves in, and yeah, there's something too that we've built this, not just an economy, but we've built status and praise on this idea of building and innovations in terms of, I mean, some people might deny science or whatever, but everyone wants their new iPhone or whatever else. That's you have a job at Silicon Valley. You made some new app. You created this thing. That's a sexy job. You got a bunch of money. You're now driving around the Tesla or whatever. You tell people that you're a professional decomposer, it doesn't have the same ring at your dinner parties and stuff, and there needs to be some sort of cultural shift in terms of, and I think there is. I think that there's already lifestyles of the rich and famous and sort of thing that I grew up seeing on TV is like kind of tacky now. I think people are starting to get
the
keen.
Opulence,
People are starting to be into having a tiny home and a compost pile and that sort of thing. But yeah, how do you, because you do a lot of education and public speaking on these topics, how do you engage the public on? Is it?
Yeah, it's kind of. So a lot of my philosophy is around the idea of meeting people where they are, right? Like, not everybody's ready to make the leap into being vegan and driving Prius, right? But some people can become more aware of turning their lights off when they leave a room, right? Like those things. At this point, we have to do everything. There's no silver bullet for sustainability. So we have to do everything to just move as many people as close as possible to, the ideal finish line as possible. So a lot of my my talks or workshops are just on either showing people where the door is, or getting them through the door, and hopefully letting the curiosity that I've kind of triggered take them further through the gateway. But I feel like a lot of my work is just around, let me introduce you, let me expose you to these new ways of thinking, these new things that are out there, these new career paths for students, these new ways to design for, when I talk to design students, it's a lot of, let me introduce you to this idea and show you why it's valuable and why it's valuable to you and to people and then, I think a big part for me, I've sat in on a couple of design critiques. My background is in architecture and in design. So I've sat on a lot of design critiques, and, a lot of the students that I'm seeing, they have like really, really creative ideas, but they're still using like plastic. I'm like, where are your sustainable materials? Like where are you thinking of that as a future designer? If you guys in school don't change this model, it's going to just keep repeating. So a lot of it is just in the initial, how do I get you curious? How do I get you engaged? And then how do I show you that there's a whole other world on the other side of what I'm telling you about?
Yeah, teaching curiosity. I think that's just any teacher could assign a homework assignment, and make this. If you want to pass this class, well, then you need to complete this project, and and you know, it can be a little bit of a stick rather than a carrot sometimes in a classic education system, and whereas I think any good teacher, certainly the ones I've talked to, is if you can inspire people to actually want to go out and investigate other things on their own, and even branches of things that the teacher themselves doesn't know about. I think that's the goal. That's the aim.
And actually, I just want to add something really quick to that, because I do this workshop on, you know, what I call it world building in the classroom, and it's all about, you know, essentially what you just said. Like there's a lot of carrots that educators can use and employ to get people interested in sustainability and STEM in general. And in this workshop, you know, the premise is all of these worlds that we're seeing, in all of these movies and films, there's science, you know, that is underlying the way that these worlds were created. And you have the opportunity as an educator to take the worlds that your students are interested in and deconstruct them, to show all of the science and all of the life science that goes into, you know, the ecosystem around, you know, what's the place called that I'm thinking of in Harry Potter? Like all of those floors. There's ecosystems in there, right? There's relationships in there, right?
I was talking.
How many lumens are in a Patronus spell? You know, like there's all these science things that you can deconstruct and get your students further engaged, that it doesn't have to be the stick all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's new shows like Black Mirror that are, you know, taking taking the torch of things like Star Trek and stuff might have set up, and there really is quite a few science concepts that you could take with there and run with. That show tends to skew more toward the paranoia aspects of like the future and be a little creepier, but still, if that's what's resonating with some people, you know, there are ways of engaging. It's funny. This is an aside, but as I'm talking about that, I've seen a lot of videos recently of robots. Have you seen like the robot like dogs that are like dancing and the choreographed thing? And
oh yeah,
people are like, oh my god, the robots are taking over. Like robots have been. I used to work in factories. Robotic arms have been, you know, autonomously moving this piece from this piece. All of a sudden, now that the robots are dancing, now you're concerned that the Terminators are right around. Yeah. They've learned choreography. Oh no! We better get off this planet quick. Yeah. What were you gonna say?
It's the smart robots that you need to worry about. It's not, you know, because, you know, technically a toaster could be defined as a robot, right? Like, so, you know, your fear of robots, you might want to shrink that down. And like those, you know, the things they don't show you is some of those robots, you sneeze on them the wrong way and they're done, right? Like they just fall over. I mean, some of them are learning to like turn themselves over, which is really creepy. But like that's, you know. The robots, I promise you, the robots aren't going to be the thing that ends, you know, planet Earth for us.
Well, let's get into Astrobiofuturism more and talk about. We don't talk much about space on this show either, which is strange for a science show, I know. But we're talking about circular economies. That's something that places like NASA, now that we have these the billionaires to space contest going on, circular economies are something that even the wealthiest people in the entire world are going to have to be thinking about in terms of design, because this is, you know, I don't know how old I'm. 41, Billy. I don't obligate my guests to share, but when I was growing up, the carrot of you could be an astronaut one day was the big driving force through much of grade school, to like, this is why you should pay attention to Christopher Columbus classes, because you could be an astronaut or something or other. It was always very confusing to me, but but there was this idea, you get to space, wow, space. But I imagine the reality of space is like, what's the bathroom situation up there is always what I want to know. There's like erectile issues that happen in space that they don't tell you about. Your choice of cuisine is probably fairly limited up there. And you talk about circular economies, like you want to make a space station sustainable. We already talked about fertilizer and that sort of. You better be making use of every bit of everything up there. Could you talk? I don't know what you focus on in space, but
I love everything that you said.
Some thoughts around that.
That totally lines up with what I would say. My focus in Astrobiofuturism is it's the human element, it's the human condition, it's the human experience in space, right? Like everything that you just said, right now, a trip to Mars, will take, plus or minus 6, 7, 8 months at length, right? And in that period of time, you are, essentially in a steel tube with, 4 or 5, however many people, depending on which billionaire is paying for the trip. And, you're not necessarily, at least on the International Space Station, you're not necessarily allowed to drink alcohol. And you're drinking each other's pee. Like, because, in terms of circular economy, all of your fluids, the International Space Station, it collects your sweat, it collects your saliva and your urine, and it recycles that, because you can't just ship up water, and all these resources like ad nauseum to people on the International Space Station. So you have to make it as sustainable and closed looped as possible. And there's things that you have to consider, and there's a form of life that you have to get used to. And one of those things is getting used to the fact that this person that I'm starting to hate because I feel like I've been up here too long, I still have to drink their pee tomorrow.
Yeah.
like
Space
these are the realities
camping.
of that's it.
And it's not, you don't pack up, you don't get to go to Mars with your friends. You go to Mars with the people most suited for going to Mars on a technical level of like, this person's a good pilot, this person's a good maintenance person, this person's a good engineer. And it doesn't necessarily, they're not pairing you like on Tinder by interest or something like that.
Space Tinder.
You're not like, which person likes
Tinder?
Like, all these people like board games. We'll put them all on the ship to Mars. No, you're getting paired with the level of expertise, and then one rich dude too, that of course gets the biggest cabin that you gotta allow for, and doesn't understand that actually 200 pounds of extra weight doesn't sound like much here on Earth, but guess what? In space, that is a whole lot of extra weight to accommodate for. I don't care how many billions you have.
And that's the thing, right? Like, and NASA, all these space agencies, they do like compatibility tests, right? But to your point, you're not going with like your drinking buddies from the bar on this isn't a road trip, right?
Yeah.
And on top of that, you're in literally the most hostile environment known to man at this point, right? You've got to deal with microgravity, you've got to deal with radiation, micrometeors, all of these different things that in an instance, if you're not on your P's and Q's, like it's literally life and death every second of every day, right? Like not even the people who originally left their continents, their land masses, and traveled in boats to other locations had to deal with the idea of, I might not have air to breathe tomorrow, right? Like they might have had to deal with turbulent weather traveling, but they always had oxygen, right? Like that was never a concern. So it's foreign in a lot of ways. Everything about our body is physiologically made to exist and thrive on this planet, right? Like not having gravity to your You mentioned, the challenges with getting an erection in space. That's a real thing, right? Because there is no gravity, which means that the blood in my body is not being pulled down to my feet like it usually is when I'm traveling. So all of my blood tends to, float above, into my upper body. And you'll notice that like astronauts have puffy faces because, there's nothing that's pushing all of that down, right? Your muscles atrophy, there's all of these different, psychological things from being isolated, you're sleeping in a little cubby, it's just, it's not the greatest experience that people think. There's just a lot of things. Yeah.
No way is NASA letting you take 2 dick pumps on the space station either. So now you're thinking of having to drink each other's urine. There's a whole sort of, why don't have they tried just doing an all-female space mission? I just feel like it takes a lot of the mess out of the situation. You got smaller bodies. You got less to feed. You got. I feel like I don't want to make broad generalizations too much here, but I feel like there's a little bit more of like group and social unity and cooperation. Not always the case, but guys are so hierarchical and everything else. Our poops are grosser, just everything about it, and we just smell more. I think that's a solution.
Yeah, actually,
nature.
I can't think of the exact source, but I know that it has penciled out that having women in space makes way more sense than at the very least that people think. And I know that the Artemis mission coming up, that's going to be the first, all-female trip back to the moon, which will be exciting. Yeah, so we'll have our first women and women of color on the moon during the Artemis mission.
Amazing.
Which I think is for 2024, I want to say.
I mean, look, there's a reason why Shaq wasn't a jockey, like I'm not trying to discriminate here. I'm just like, we're talking about pragmatic issues that come along with certain constraints. And I bet that all women mission, I bet they're gonna be like, yep, that's just what we're doing.
That's it. Yeah. Told you. It's about time. There's also there's also a lot of insights around how people with physical I don't want to say disabilities, but people with different body challenges or not challenges, whatever the correct way to say that is. Why they make a lot more sense as space travelers, because yes, they are lighter, they're just as competent. You don't necessarily need. Right. I remember someone saying like you don't need legs or you don't need feet in space because you're weightless. So it on average it costs around like $10,000 per pound to send something into space. Yeah. So that's why it's so hard and so expensive to do a lot of this stuff, because the cost of getting stuff up is just astronomical, no pun intended.
Yeah, it really I mean, I'm surprised we put humans up there at all, to be honest. I'm surprised it's not just more probes and putting AI and that sort of thing. But I suppose that there's things that only humans can do and things that we can discover. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad you're on board for my all-female little people space mission. I feel like that's why Stephen Hawking was trying to get to space. So, but like he would have been perfect for the mission, but I feel like he was trying to like scare us about the apocalyptic situations of Earth a little bit, just because he was so. He wanted to get into that zero gravity so much. I feel like he was maybe a little biased, but So I'm getting off on weird tangents in this episode. Can we talk a little bit about? I want to make sure and talk a little bit about your show, Little Giants on Animal Planet because for listeners, if you get the Animal Planet, if you have like one of these devices, I have Roku. That's not a plug for Roku. I don't even know that I do have that actually. I forget I have a few different various Amazon Fire Sticks or whatever you have. If you get the Animal Planet app, you can check out Little Giants on there, which Billy is a co-host of. Can you tell people a little bit about the premise of Little Giants? I've seen all but the last 2 episodes so far, which I'm going to watch tonight.
Oh, cool. So Little Giants is the show with me and my dear friend and wildlife expert, Bradley Trevor Grieve. And it's he and I going out to these really far remote places around the world and finding these little creatures who have either some really interesting myth that's been built up around them, or they do something really, really fascinating in terms of the biological adaptations that they have to live and thrive in their niche, in their niches and in their environments. So it's he and I going out trying to find these little things in their environment, making fools of ourselves and trying to chase after these really fast, small little things. And then when we do catch some of them, we have this, mobile lab that we've set up to try to capture and measure just how amazing the individual abilities of these creatures are at their scale. And then through CGI, we explore, what it would actually be like if you took, this mouse who has like extremely powerful jaws, and you scaled that mouse up to the size of a truck. If you scaled it up to the size of a truck, how strong would those jaws then be, pound for pound? So it's really fun. It's one of those introduction kind of shows, family oriented, and it was just awesome to film it in general.
Yeah. It's such a fun premise to think about. When some small creature leaps, compared to how far a human can leap, or compared to how far, some other thing that's much better than humans at leaping can go. If you were to scale it up to that size, I was curious when I was watching, and obviously it's an introductory show for families and stuff, but you've probably had this thought while making it, is in terms of taking things from biomimicry and implementing it into things here on Earth or for space travel or whatever. We don't always assume that the design is perfect, and you take aspects of sharks having certain skin that's rough, that's perhaps antimicrobial or something like that. You take certain aspects like that and maybe not use the whole thing. In that same way, when you take something like some lizard that glides or whatever and scale it up, I mean, if you use like a Honey, I Shrunk the Kid laser and then actually made them that size, they would all just collapse under the weight of gravity, wouldn't they?
Right.
Because of the way that their structures are actually engineered. And small things pack a punch, as I like to tell as many women as I can. And like Mike Tyson, for example, was not the tallest boxer that ever lived. He was but these small creatures have just different things that work from an architectural level. Are you still enjoying my penis joke?
Just cut me off.
I was worried it wasn't gonna go over. It killed. Usually I have a pretty subtle delivery and I kind of just let things go right by.
Oh my God.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
That was great. Well placed.
I never get this much validation on my podcast. How do you go about taking something that you see like that, and like it is. I love the show. I love the CGI scaled up things and showing like here's this elephant ramming into a car or whatever, compared to if this lizard was scaled up. But how do you actually take things from nature and think about how they can practically be implemented and scaled?
I see. So this is more how do, like, what is the actual process of biomimicry?
Yeah.
Or you're saying like specifically for like, how do we think about these comparisons for the show?
Yeah, the first question. Like in terms of if you're literally trying to implement biomimicry rather than entertain family friendly audience.
Yeah. It's I love that question. So when you're looking at something in nature, right? Like all science, and this is why we say like this is a practice that people have been doing since time immemorial, right? Like this is not a new, it's a trend. People use the word biomimicry, but it's, it's an indigenous, ancient, everlasting thing that we've been doing, right? The example that I have that comes to mind, which is not, this is what I imagine biomimicry looked like back in the cave days, right? And I'll use this to give you a more direct answer. But in my mind, one of the earliest forms of biomimicry, my theory, is fishing nets and spiders, right? In my mind, like that some ancient person came across a spider web and saw an insect that was trapped in that web trying to get out.
Yeah.
And said, this spider has created a great way to capture things. I wonder if I can take that same pattern, that same web design, and I wonder if I can capture fish the way that this spider just captured that. Now, of course, webs are sticky, blah, 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 blah. But my initial thought is, the function of the web is to capture, right? Or to ensnare or to trap, right? And if you look at a fishing net, especially some of the, the older designs, they look very similar to spider webs, right? And they serve the same function, to capture. So when you're practicing biomimicry, you're looking at the function of what the design is doing, right? And then you're applying the function that the animal has solved for, or the strategy, right? Because the function, there's different strategies that you can create to address a function, right? If I'm trying to capture something, I can use tape, right? Or I can use, a web design, or I can use, a trap. So there's different strategies, right? And so in nature, there's all of these different strategies to do this one function of capturing, right? I can hide, I can camouflage myself and then jump out and grab it, right? Or if I'm a spider, I can create a web and let something fly into it and it be trapped in the web. So all of these different strategies exist in the natural world. And so in biomimicry, what we're doing is saying, okay, of these strategies to capture something, this is the strategy that works best for the problem that I have to address this function. And that is what we're doing. We're saying, like, how can we do this thing? And then we're looking over nature and saying, well, this spider does this thing that I'm also trying to do. How is it doing this? Well, its strategy is to use a web. So maybe I can design something that serves the same function of capturing and use that for, something that is at the human scale. Does that?
Yeah. That very much answers the question. Yeah. That's because I mean, and I love thinking about how far back we have been copying strategies from other life on the planet, right? In terms of, I mean, it's just like you use I think the idea of cavemen is kind of trite and inaccurate, but still the idea of just like, hey, you can build a cave anywhere, and that's homes. That's our first. And then things like pyramids or anything else like that resemble some certain like anthills and different structures like that. And isn't there some mall somewhere that started using what they've learned from termite mounds? Have you heard of this? So they like in Africa or something like that. So they didn't need air conditioning, and they saw that termite mounds are built up so much, it gets air circulating from the core of the ground to breathe it out and have the heat rise up that way. Yeah. What are some of your other favorite examples of biomimicry?
So this is where the space stuff starts to intersect too. One example that I just came across the other day, and again, part of why I'm interested in space is because, NASA. The cool thing about NASA is that, it's a public entity in terms of, it's government funded, right? So the technology that NASA creates, we as citizens of this country in the United States, we're able to license that technology and create businesses around it. So these things are referred to as spin-offs. So there's all these NASA spin-offs of technology that has been licensed from something that was originally created from exploring space. And there's this one company, I want to say it's called EagleView, and they create sunglasses. So what's interesting about the story is NASA scientists were looking for a way to reduce the amount of radiation that was getting into, the eyes of astronauts. And in order for them to find a way to, reduce this amount of radiation, they actually turned to nature. So they studied birds, and I think specifically hawks. They studied hawks who have in their eyes this layer of oil that actually filters out certain wavelengths of radiation and light. And so from that, they mimicked the layer of oil in the eyes. So that gold sheath that you see in a lot of films and NASA helmets and all that to filter out, that was inspired by them studying the eyes of hawks. And there's this company that created sunglasses that millions of people wear, that was based on this space technology, that was based on the adaptation in the eyes of a bird. So there's a lot of fun stuff out there that was just like, NASA looking at this, created this, and now that's being used to create X, Y, and Z.
Man, that's a wonderful story, and also just another there's another reason I hadn't thought of why to not go to space. You come back, you're blind now. You have no muscle mass. You're blind, you're weak, and you just got your functions back. You come back, everyone's greeting you. You can barely walk, you're blind, and you just have a raging heart on. And as you're trying to as that function comes back. I already used way too many dick jokes in this episode, Billy. Oh my God. I'm gonna have to toss this whole thing out. It's a part of the life cycle.
So now you see why I'm focused on the human experience in space, because
Are you trying to get to space? What's the deal? NASA calls you up and says, we got a spot for you. We need someone to get up there, take a look around, make it more amusing for people, and make it a little more like a roller coaster ride, but also build efficiencies based on nature. Biomimicry, while you're up there, we're going to have you do public education and give some talks and stuff, as I know you're fond of doing. You have a lot of fantastic qualities that would be good for space and space travel and be a good endorser generally. But do you really want to go up?
I have very little desire to go. So I would go for those reasons that you just said. I would go to lower Earth, or I would go to lower Earth orbit. Lower Earth orbit, right? Like where the International Space Station is. I would go up there,
Sure.
be like, look around, float. No, this is kind of dope. All right, time to go. And then come back down and be like, all right, I can check that, unexpected thing off my list. But, having a strong desire to be up there and live is not my interest. I am interested in creating a space farm. I think farming in space is going to be a big thing. And so I want to be, one of the people who figures that out and owns a space farm for a couple of different reasons. But living in space is not for me. It's not. It's not, especially where things are now.
If you work really hard.
Yeah.
If
you
you
don't
do
realize
your
how
best,
early we are in space exploration. Like we are just like we haven't even taken the full first step. If you were actually thinking of like steps, like we've just lifted our foot to put it on a step. Like we haven't even touched the step yet.
Yeah, it's insane. It's like you worked so hard your whole life. You were at the top of your class. You went through this rigorous training. You got paired with people with like enough compatibility personalities, which is probably not a perfect matching anyway. And then what you get in reward for that is an exceedingly dangerous, and if not dangerous, like if you're lucky enough to survive it, pretty boring, tedious, uncomfortable trip to a vacuum, an actual large, infinite vacuum. So, which brings me to my last little thing. What can we learn from this to inhabit like the desert? Or you mentioned the ocean. More people have been to space than the bottom of the ocean. I'm interested. That's what I want to get in a submarine. I want to see people are out there they're building things. Oh, I wonder if we'll ever get a message from space. Oh, what's this thing that some some Air Force guy saw some things shooting through space that was for some reason they only had the camera running that is made out of toilet paper tubes, and wow, isn't that exciting that maybe there's aliens here? If you watch you watch one of these BBC like Blue Ocean things or whatever, what isn't an alien? You can't not bump into an alien. You can't go into the ocean. There's aliens just swimming around you everywhere. They're coming up to you. You're getting to look at them. It's incredible. That's where I'm heading. That's where I want to go explore. Thoughts, questions, concerns?
I'm with you. I mean, I think, it is crazy that, it's interesting how many people are fascinated by space exploration, and versus like you said, the ocean. I mean, the ocean is in a lot of ways, I don't want to say it's more dangerous, but it's as dangerous as traveling to space, right? Like you got to deal with crushing pressure, right? Like you get a hole in that thing, I hope you wrote your love letters, right? It's crazy.
But Jar Jar Binks pulled it off, and he was the dumbest one ever.
And there is life. There is life at the bottom of the ocean, right? Like there's so much that we are yet to tap into and see. And I think, to your question of it's almost ironic in a lot of ways, because astronauts train for space, in bodies of water, right? They have these huge tanks, these giant, tanks of water, and they're training with aquanauts, and so the value of the ocean inherently to space is exponential, just from training people to go out there. And I do think, for me, it is the hope that by creating all of this technology to live in the most minimalistic place, ever, the vacuum of space, we can find additional things that we can use beyond satellites. I mean, satellites provide us great insights and data that we use for, tracking wildfires. And, there's all these great things that have already benefited the planet. from space exploration. But I'm hoping that we can, the thing that I want is I want the robot that has bristles that can like filter out all this trash the way that a whale does. You know what I mean? Like those are the kind of creations that I'm interested in creating or finding out about and talking about. That's the astrobiofuturism work. It's like, how do we reverse engineer a lot of this stuff, but how do we also apply it in different ways that can help us better the planet?
Take those whale fin bumps and throw them on a fan, throw them on a propeller.
That's it.
Come on, let's build some efficiencies here. Yeah, no, I think that is to me that's one of the most intriguing things about space is it's mostly a PR stunt, weird space parade situation, but in my opinion, the putting the constraints and the amount of problem solving that comes out of that is of course going to have downstream implications. And if you can get 6 people to sustain in some little capsule in a vacuum, drinking their own urine, it's certainly we can figure things out here on Earth to make less waste and everything else, and that's really exciting to me. So before we wrap up, why don't you plug your stuff? Direct people to where you'd like them to go. You have a great website, and I want people to check out Little Giants on Animal Planet. You're on Instagram. Plug all the things.
Yes. So I do a lot of STEM-oriented workshops. I do a lot of keynote speaking. So if anyone's looking for a keynote speaker or a workshop for students around storytelling, world building, biomimicry, what I refer to as the nature of space, how you can find space, how you can find nature in all of the different ways that space is being explored, how to design for space. These are all different lectures and workshops that I give, and you can find me on my website at 𝕊𝕙𝕒𝕚𝕟𝕒.com, or you can connect with me directly on Instagram. My handle is at @Billy_Almon. Same for Twitter, but I'm primarily on Instagram. I think I've aged out of TikTok, but I'm not sure yet. And Little Giants is on Animal Planet or Animal Planet Go. Feel free to watch and enjoy and let me know what you thought about the show. Thanks again for even having me, man. This has been hilarious.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Yeah, this is fantastic information. I really appreciate everything that you're doing and your ability to communicate these ideas in a way that's really accessible for the public. So I appreciate you, Billy.
Likewise. Keep doing your thing, man. This is great. I don't think I've laughed that hard on a podcast, so I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, listeners, for being such wonderful, curious people. We'll talk with you more next week.